To get started, what I'd like to do is I have a few remarks just to sort of put you in the mode of what we're going to be talking about today. But first of all, I'd like to introduce my panel. First of all, Julie Crooks is to my immediate right. And Julie is a PhD candidate, curator and art educator. Dominique Fontaine, who's here from Montreal, who's a curator, an independent curator. And they're going to be presenting together. Directly next is Pamela Edmonds, who is an independent curator and also has worked in art galleries, a former programming director of A Space Gallery and curator at the Peterborough Art Gallery, and currently an independent curator. And I'm going to let her give you the details. And then on the very end of the table is Michelle Jacks. And Michelle is a former curator at the Art Gallery of Ontario and is currently the curator of the Victoria Greater Public Gallery. Yeah, of Greater Victoria. If you can look at in the package, there's biographies on everyone for further details. So what I'd like to do is, this is another opportunity to continue the dialogue for speaking of and sharing the engaging nature of the work that we've been doing over the last day and a half, but also to make a specific contribution and dialogue in relation to art of the Black diaspora and our contribution in the Canadian art milieu, but also internationally. Also, our contributions to the evolving dialogues and critical perspectives on art of the Black diaspora, from the uncovering and reinstating of cultural and art histories to the expansion of more artists and curators taking on multiple roles in our communities, and attaining the educational and professional opportunities to develop and to realize their artistic work, their research, and their curatorial projects. It is good to be here today after the opportunity to present and share the artistic work as we did in the last day and a half. And this is work that we do. The production of art, the production of exhibitions, the production of culture across communities in Canada. However, one of the things that's very evident, and you will note from all the presenters today, is that we take on multiple roles at the same time. Artists, curators, and as curators, independent curators working in the community or with different arts organizations, institutional positions, and also then with as art educators and art and cultural administrators, sometimes occupying and trying to do these things at the same time. But also, we also work as mentors in relation to supporting professional development and education within our own communities. This panel has a depth of experiences working in Black communities, artist-run centers, public galleries, and museums. In occupying these art professional roles, there have been many experiences and opportunities to realize our artistic work of research, development of art projects in many forms, including exhibitions. So there are many forms within which the visual arts are presented and disseminated to a broader audience and public. So we'll be exploring that issue. The panelists will offer some of their experiences of past, present, and future work in the context of the cultural and critical dialogues that inform their practices, in the complex process of researching, presenting, disseminating, and communicating the depth of their work. And I'd like to move it over. The first presenters, Julie Crooks and Dominique Fontaine, are going to present together.
Thank you very much. We are here to, my name is Dominique Fontaine, and with Julie Crooks, we're here to present a project that we've been working on for a year now called Of Africa. And it's a project that we started developing with the Royal Ontario Museum. So, Julie.
Thanks. So the genesis of this project came about, I guess, about a year ago, after following a workshop at Concordia University. And the workshop wasn't so much about the ROM, but about, I guess it was a little bit about Into the Heart of Africa and museum practices and other issues. And it became very clear that the pain and the trauma that was created around the Into the Heart of Africa controversy with the Black community was still very evident. People like Afua Cooper, who was part of this workshop, was still feeling kind of very visceral, the visceral effects of that experience. So we came back to Toronto and felt that we needed to do something. Also, this year would mark the 25th anniversary of the opening of the Into the Heart of Africa exhibition. And we felt that we needed to do something concrete that addressed some of those still underlying issues and unresolved issues. And so Dominique and I began to talk about what this could be, what kind of project we could implement and the purpose behind that project, and came up with the Of Africa project. So I'm just going to kind of go through a little bit of what the background of the...
Next slide, please.
Oh, we don't have any control? No. So just very briefly, as most... Okay. So we can go to the next slide, I think. So very briefly, the Into the Heart of Africa controversy was an example of a contested exhibition that has transformed how several museums in the West engage with source communities in the shaping of exhibitions and programming. Beyond its broader theoretical import and its impact on international museum practices and debates, Into the Heart of Africa affected in a dramatically negative way and compromised the relationship between the ROM and Toronto's Black communities. Also significant was the failure of museum administrators to engage in a dialogue with the protesters, which crystallized tensions and reinforced the Black community's perception of the museum as a deeply colonial and non-inclusive institution. 25 years later, this year, after the protests that alienated Ontario's Black community from the ROM, this fracture has not been fully recomposed. This multi-platform project that we are proposing, I think we can go to the next slide. So this is, of course, Into the Heart of Africa and some of the images that reference that exhibition. The next slide, please. So this multi-platform project aims to engage this problematic relationship through the development of an academic platform for discussion on the one hand, and the concrete implementation of displays and educational projects that focus on African history and the persistence of problematic tropes and stereotypes in the representation of African-related topics in the museum. The contestation surrounding the Into the Heart of Africa brought to the forefront the relevance that the display and representation of traditional African art has, and actually contemporary African art, for the diverse communities of African descent living in the Canadian diaspora. This relationship is not as clearly traceable from a historical and genealogical point of view. However, the longer and more tortuous path connecting African objects and people in Canada is no less meaningful or relevant from a political, intellectual, and effective point of view.
We could go to the next slide. So what we're proposing, what we had proposed to the museum is to do a multidisciplinary project that will involve researchers, community partners, educators, in thinking about, with the museum displays and collection, to explore evocative, affective, and educational potential in the 21st century Canadian society. So what we did, we formed, if we can move to the next slide, we form an advisory committee with people from the community, with people like Afua Cooper. We're working also, I have to say that we're working with Sylvia Forney from the museum. She's the curator of the Africa Gallery at the museum. She's been part of the development of this project since the beginning, and she's here today too. If you can, Sylvia. She's here. So Sylvia is one of the force of this project, and we are collaborating with an advisory committee that consists of Professor Afua Cooper, Professor Warren Crishlaw, artist Wayne Donkley, Professor Elizabeth Harney, Professor Mariam Lowe, Dr. Kenneth Montague, Ms. Gaetan Verna, and Professor Rinaldo Walcott. So what we're proposing to do is to create a platform that will document the whole process, and also to do specific activities like exhibitions, residencies, conversation, film and video series. We'll have an interactive website. We're working towards a symposium. We also, at the end of the program, we will have a publication. So, this is what we've done before. This week, we had our first activity, which was 2 weeks ago. 2 days ago, sorry. 2 days ago, we had a film program.
Next slide.
The next slide, yeah, sorry. And so we're moving forward with this project. And so the next program we'll do will be in the spring. We'll have an intervention in the gallery space we'll do a multidisciplinary evening. And then we hope to have our website platform online by the spring. And in the fall, we'll have the symposium. Do you want to talk about the symposium?
Yeah. I think the other important aspect of the programming is the involvement of the original activists that basically many of them gave their lives more or less for the cause. So one of the, as part of the symposium, we will have some of those original activists on a panel also talking about that experience in terms of, what it was like to go through it, how it changed their lives, which it did profoundly, alongside other international and local artists and scholars and educators who will all kind of address the various issues in terms of practices in the museum, and kind of the heart of it, of course, is the Into the Heart of Africa controversy.
So one thing that we're aiming for with this program and this project is to it's to affect change in ways which Canadian audiences view Africa and people of African descent. And our intention is to present multiple viewpoints about Africa and its diasporas. And also, we want to also offer an opportunity to create new spaces for exchange, and also that consider the audience as a critical part in the process. That's why we're planning to do a lot of workshops, community intervention. We need the audience, the public, to be part of the development of this project. They can, so it's something different that we would like to offer to the museum, an engagement with the members of the African and African diasporic communities in Toronto and in Canada. So yeah, that's about it.
Thank you. Is this on? Yeah. Pamela?
I don't think, I'm gonna actually go to the podium because the lights are really bright and I can't see anything. So, Good afternoon, everyone. Testing. All right. I thought that I would present a less academic type of talk. As a curator, I'm very much interested in theory, but this conference is something that I think when I first started in art school about, I guess, in the early 1990s, this was the kind of symposium, the kind of gathering that I had always dreamed of seeing. So I want to thank Andrea and OCAD and everyone involved in bringing this together. And I wanted to talk about my what really got me interested in curating. And so I went way back about 15 years ago when I first started to think about ideas of my practice. And so I'm just going to share some of my experiences within various institutions, mostly in the East Coast of Canada, and talk about the different engagements with the Black community. So just to give some background, my focus as a curator developed around the politics of race, representation, and Black subjectivity. And I'm really interested in how artists are positioned within mainstream institutions. So once I actually started off studying visual art. I was interested in painting. And one of my first professors, actually the only Black professor I had in my entire education, Robert Murray, was, I don't know, it was just his presence at the university in Concordia where I was studying that inspired me. He talked to me about, looking to my own identity for inspiration. And at the time in the mid-90s, there was a lot of discussion around post-colonialism and postmodernism, and I really began to get motivated and interested and speaking with a lot of artists at the time about, how come we're kind of left out of the dialogue. And there was a lot of grassroots collectives. There was a lot of just activist work going on. So I decided when I did get my BFA, I would move back to Halifax, where my family is from, and I would just start curating. I started, actually the first, if you can show the first slide. My first job in the I guess cultural arts was at a venue called the Black Cultural Center for Nova Scotia, which is located in Cherry Brook, which is one of the historic Black communities in Dartmouth. And my position was as a curatorial assistant to Dr. Henry Bishop, who was there from the beginning. The institution has been there since 1983, and it houses a museum and a library. And part of my job was to give tours of the exhibitions, and there was a permanent displays of communities, archives and artifacts. There was also a very popular display, very moving display about Africville. And I also at the time joined the Black Artists Network of Nova Scotia, which Sylvia Hamilton, who was here, was part of helping to initiate. And I think, coming back to Halifax, there was some of the artists that I talked to were saying, there's not enough partnerships going on with the Cultural Center, and we were hoping that we would be able to do more collaborations. But before I really got a chance to do that, I actually got a job at Mount St. Vincent Art Gallery to do outreach for a show on Romare Bearden, and I was like, okay, I'm doing that show. but I wanted to say before that, I had recently heard that that Henry's position and 2 other positions were, well, he basically got laid off, and the space was having funding issues, and I heard that Henry found out about it through the newspaper, and it's just, you know, really disappointing to know with all of our cultural work and such a rare institution that you know, we can do more to kind of keep that going. So I'm hoping that in the future that, you know, as maybe part of this initiative, that there could be some more collaborations. It's still open, it's reopened, but that was part of the drive for me to relook at my history. So back to Bearden. Okay, so that exhibition was really inspiring, and I wanted to talk about it because it was one of the exhibitions that really seemed to strike a chord with the local Black community. Can you go to the next slide? So, oh, it's partly cut off. But this was an education guide that I put together for the gallery. The show was called The Painted Sounds of Romare Bearden. And what I think really made part of that exhibition a success was the sensitivity and the support of the gallery director, Ingrid Jenkner. She, at this space, was very always just politically driven. What we did for that show, I mean, we went everywhere. We went to like churches, we went to local Black businesses. We told everyone how important it was to see this show. We had school tours, we did local presentations. We had Jeremiah Sparks, who was an amazing musician, come and do a concert. And it really galvanized the community at the time. It was in 1998. And David Woods, who's next slide please, is really been instrumental in keeping the Black Artist Network going. He was saying how much the Bearden Show inspired him, and he decided to organize an exhibition called In This Place, which brought together over 50 artists. And it was showing at the Annalee Noens Gallery at NASCAD, where I was a gallery assistant, so I finished my job at the Mount. And I helped facilitate some of the arrangements of the show. And it featured, as I said, 50 artists dating back to 1885. And what was amazing about this exhibition was really David's drive to just uncover art everywhere. And he didn't just look to the art gallery. He went to people's houses. He was like unearthing artwork everywhere. And I remember the opening was, I mean, I was like pressed up against the wall. It was like you could barely fit the amount of people that came to that show. It was actually the most Black folks I ever seen at any gallery. And there's 3 gallery spaces, and we were just maxed. And it was just this feeling of pride and the feeling of, you know, okay, this is the real community. It's like, I won't forget it. It was just like an amazing moment. And I think that's what inspired me to, okay, now I'm really getting serious about doing the curating. But there was, at the opening, I remember a well-known curator who's actually, white curator, who he's a director at a Halifax gallery saying, you know, this is an important celebration of firsts, but now the real work has to happen. And, you know, when he said that to me, I was kind of like, okay, where's this coming from? It kind of upset me, but then it made me think about how the Black artist is positioned, and it also made me think about another aspect of my practice, about looking at the Black artists and how we are entered into the mainstream. So next slide, please. Okay, that's more images. Where am I? Am I 2 minutes? Oh my gosh. Okay. All right. So I curated an exhibition called Black Body, Race Resistance Response, which was at Dal Art Gallery. And this was part of the ideas I was thinking about. It looked at the racialized body, showing 6 Canadian artists. And I brought this up because it came on the heels of an actually 10 years later, from an exhibition that was, okay, wait, let me rewind. I just wanted to say that the Dal Art Gallery had some bad relationships with the Black community, let me say. Can you go to the next slide, please? Okay, there was an exhibition there called No Laughing Matter, which featured work by Carrie Mae Weems and her No Ain't Joking series, which paired images of Black folks with racist jokes, and it was meant to look at satire and how humor could be used to just position and criticize racial stereotypes. And I wasn't living in Halifax at the time the show went up, but I did hear about it, and it was another instance of the gallery being picketed. The Black Law Students Association wanted the work taken down, but the gallery was saying, you know, we have a right to keep this work up. And they had actually hired security guards to watch the photographs. And, you know, needless to say, when I wanted to do my show, 10 years later, there was still some bad feelings. So it was a difficult space to enter. Next slide, please. And actually, the image just before that of the figure in the box, that was work by Michael Chambers, and his work was one of the works that the gallery was saying was too strong, and they were very particular about the kind of work I could show in that space, and it was really the most stressful experience, I'm telling you. And but I, you know, after a lot of consultation, after speaking with a lot of people, I've just decided, you know, I got support for the show. I put it on, and sorry, wrap it up. Okay, I just want to say that. Okay, keep going, keep the slides going. So I'll keep talking. This is Busaji Bailey, Body Politics, Rebecca Fisk. But we had like amazing reviews. We had a great show. No controversy. It was all good. So just to say about my practice now, I'm interested in broadening my curatorial practice on a more international level. I'm looking now at the Black Atlantic and about asserting a Canadian presence in those dialogues. So you could just, that's one of the reviews. This was a show I did, was part of a Black Women's Art Collective. We did a show at Art Gallery in Nova Scotia. You could keep going, called Sister Visions, and it was actually the first show of contemporary Black artists ever in the history of that gallery, which has been around since 1908, and that's my artwork. Lucy Chan, you can keep going, and this was a curatorial residency I did in the UK, which brought UK artists with Canadian artists, called Serious Play. It's kind of cut off, but it was dealing with rhetorical strategies in contemporary art. Next slide. This, it's cut off too, called 28 Days, looked at in the institutionalization of art within Black History Month. 19 artists from the UK, Canada, and the US. Next slide. This is a show I'm researching called Sugar in the Blood, that looks at women's histories in the Caribbean, Canada, and the UK in relation to the sugar trade. I think that's my last slide. But basically, I just wanted to say that there's been a lot of, one of the points I wanted to make about the burden that's put on culturally diverse art to have to produce results. And I'm interested in being able to enter a space and let the art be art, you know, and you know, still be able to address issues of culture and race, but it not having to be always educational or ethnicized, I guess. So I'm done. Thank you.
Victoria is, it's the kind of town that a lot of people dream about moving to. A lot of people retire there, a lot of people go on vacation there and never leave, or just go home long enough to pick up their stuff and then they move back. You know, it's quaint and it's temperate. It's surrounded by breathtaking landscape. And despite all of these incredible attributes to the city, I was not one of these people who dreamed about moving to Victoria. But somehow I found myself wrapped up in the interview process of this job, position of chief curator at the gallery in Victoria. And for some reason, just through the conversations that I was having with people at this institution, it became evident early on that it was going to be, well, maybe at the time, to be perfectly honest, I didn't realize how good a place it was going to be for me, but I realized that it would be a better place for me. And it's hard to go into a lot of detail about what I mean by that in a 10 or 12-minute talk. And certainly on paper, it probably looks like a crazy move for somebody like me to leave the city that is now described as the place where visible minorities are the majority. To leave a place like that and go to a city that still bears a lot of the obvious characteristics of the fact that, and this is a quote from a book called More English Than the English, which is about the early days of Victoria. The quote is that the city was founded by British immigrants trying to create a society based on nostalgic notions of their homeland. And of course, they were doing this on usurped Aboriginal territory. So 15 months after my move out west, I'm still coming to terms with the city that I ended up in because I was drawn to an opportunity in an institution there. Some of the kind of superficial differences are, I get kicked out of my office at 5 p.m. Nobody works late. Most people that I've met in Victoria would rather go for a hike than for a cocktail. And while Victoria has hundreds of really good restaurants, sometimes what this workaholic ex-Torontonian really needs is just a single mediocre one that's open late. But really the hardest difference to grapple with is the difference in the demographic makeup of the two cities. In the city of Victoria itself, and these stats that I'm going to give you are they're a bit misleading perhaps because I could only find census data for the city of Victoria, and as I explained, Victoria is just one district within this unamalgamated group of small cities or small towns that make up the greater area. But in the city of Victoria itself, according to the 2011 census, the non-white citizens, and this includes Aboriginal individuals, account for 18% of the city's population. So that means that I live in a place where 82% of the population is white. And when I got there and realized that, the first question I asked myself was, why the hell did they hire me? Like just to think about that in numbers, the population of the city of Victoria as of 2011, was about 76,000 people. So that means that there are 850 Black people in the city of Victoria. To complicate this even further, Victoria's tourist trade is one that sells itself based, certainly on the natural beauty of the city's island location, but also on its tea rooms, its Queen Elizabeth impersonators, and its English gardens. In other words, its colonial legacy. And the gallery that I'm working at was definitely founded on this legacy. And for the first 22 years of its existence, it was led by a gentleman named Colin Graham, the founding director. And he is known as a collector of collectors. So what he did was build up this community around the gallery of all of these folks of European heritage who liked to surround themselves with beautiful objects, whether it be artwork by European or Euro-Canadian artists, or there's a great taste for historical Asian art in the community, and the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria has the second largest collection of historical Asian art in the country after the ROM. So it's it's a collection that is defined by a colonial past and an institution that was founded out of that kind of motivation. So I'm still asking myself that question, what am I doing there? But if we skip ahead to the current day, the gallery is on the verge of launching a building project. They didn't tell me about this during the interview. I found out the day that I arrived there that basically that's why they hired me. Oh, she's got experience with building projects. And the interesting thing is that for decades, this is a institution that has been trying to get out of the neighborhood location where it's situated and move to a site downtown in the Inner Harbor with the other tourist attractions. And all of those attempts fell through, so the current administration recently decided to expand on the current site, to remain in a neighborhood. And this is a decision that not everybody has gotten down with, but in my opinion, its benefit is that it allows for the construction of an institution that can focus on community engagement rather than on getting numbers through the door. Because we're not a tourist attraction, we're a neighborhood museum. And community, unlike audience, is not measured in numbers. So the proportional statistics that I reported earlier become irrelevant in that kind of institution. So in my role as chief curator, I'm not sure if this is why they hired me, but this is why I've decided they hired me. I see the opportunity in Victoria as one of creating a context of community building, where stories and art and ideas can be shared and bridges can be built. Institutions can promote tolerance and create opportunities for self-determination, no matter where they're located and no matter how the community, how the population that they're working with breaks down. So, Betty mentioned that we're all working on creating art and creating culture and creating community. And in my current role, I do the most boring thing possible. I create policy. But I wanted to just share with you the kind of nascent guiding principles that we've been developing at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria. And I really have to point out that as well as working with my director on developing these guiding principles, I've been working with the director of finance and the director of advancement. And advancement is the department that encompasses marketing and fundraising. And I'm not sure if it's evident how rare it is to have those money people behind a set of principles that reads like this. So there are 5 principles. The first one is relevance. We believe that artistic production can address social issues and stimulate personal engagement and reactions. Our programming must have relevance to our communities and make connections to emerging and relevant social issues, thus inviting visitors to see how art relates to their own experiences and facilitating shared experiences amongst our audiences. Number 2 is discussion. We believe that a rich blend of artistic experiences encourages meaningful, personal, and community exchange and dialogue. Our programming must provide an opportunity to build and sustain respectful relationships with all of our communities by presenting issues of importance, encouraging interaction, and inviting both formal and informal conversation, learning, and debate. Number 3 is interaction. We believe in the importance of the gallery's role in stimulating the creative experiences of our visitors and communities. Our programming must be conceived to provide opportunities to think, explore, and act creatively, and we will invite our audiences to do so by engaging them in activities that encourage making connections between visual art and their own experiences. Number 4 is collaboration. We believe that collaboration enables us to expand our audiences and build stronger and more meaningful relationships with visual art. Our programming must be built on interdepartmental teamwork, and we value the involvement of community partners, for this enables diversity in programming and strengthens relationships amongst participants and audiences. And the final and arguably most important guiding principle is inclusion. We believe that an informed engagement with visual art can have a deep impact on an individual's sense of identity and belonging. Our programming must be inclusive and engage artists and audiences from a full spectrum of demographic and cultural groups, encouraging multiple interpretations and recognizing that there are a variety of styles of communicating, learning, and teaching. So this morning we were in breakout sessions where we were talking about, in my session, talking about pedagogical practices in the museum and the institution, and we came to the conclusion that a really important thing that we need to do is educate audiences who want to see our work and who will demand to see our work, and that's the only way we're going to compete with David Bowie. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle. And Michelle, you spoke of it right at your last principle, which was about inclusion, but also developing, and maybe you could expand upon it, about educating the audience so that they demand. I'm not quite clear how you meant that, because it's a complex relationship between the audience and the art and the institutions or the places of art. So could you expand upon that a bit?
Sure. This is on? You can, yeah. Yeah, it's so hard to reduce this into a few minutes, but my comments really come out of a lot of thinking that I've been doing about the differences between the two institutions in which I have worked. And you know, I've done a whole sort of financial analysis about the realities of the AGO and the numbers that they have to get through the door in order to keep an institution of that scale going, compared to the kind of place where I work now, where exhibitions don't have to make money. So I really feel for the AGO, because every project that they do is a risk. They have to self-generate $44 million every year. You know, the issue is that right now they're getting the numbers that they need for a certain kind of exhibition. In Victoria, we get the numbers that we need for exhibitions that tell stories that people in the community can relate to, because somehow it connects to their life or history or experience in that place. I mean, I can't believe that I've kind of landed in that scenario, because those are the kinds of exhibitions that I like to work on. But it's about like undisneyfying the audience, helping them understand the potential of engaging with meaningful art and artists and projects. And that's really hard work, I think.
Thank you. Pamela, do you have any thoughts? No.
Yeah, I was just thinking about.
It's not working. Yeah.
Do you have to talk? Okay. Just related to the David Bowie exhibit, I was just thinking about a show I saw in Montreal a few years ago about Miles Davis, and you know, it was one of the most remarkable exhibitions I ever saw. I mean, to have his music and to see his own art practice, and his costumes were crazy, and like just his album covers. And, you know, I think about this idea of how whiteness is still seen as universal or normative, and you know, why can't, I mean, Black culture influences the world, you know, it's like hip-hop culture, why can't it appeal and make, you know, bring in millions of dollars? I'm not saying that, you know, David Bowie over Miles Davis would be, I'm not comparing it that way, but I'm just thinking that, you know, that maybe there's this idea that it's just a specific audience is going to take in our work. And it's not necessarily the case. Like, I think in reference to my early practice, I mean, I was motivated by that and inspired by it. But, you know, in a lot of the exhibitions that I did and like talks and whatnot, I'd be so surprised sometimes of the people I found responded to the show who I didn't really necessarily, you know their histories, but, you know, they had profound responses to it. So it sort of made me realize that, you know, I can't always know who my audience is going to be and always necessarily target it just to the Black community. So I think if we are just open to doing education, I think in a lot of different ways, and outside of like traditional maybe artist talks, having other kind of perspectives, different perspectives on interpreting the work, it might broaden it out.
Thank you. Thank you. Any questions? Yes.
One, congratulations for taking on the project of revisiting the ROM. And I guess my question is, how, if you can tell us a bit more about how you see interrupting the space or occupying the space. One of the things I think that you talked about is having some installation or exhibition in the space itself. And if you can talk a bit about how you envision interrupting that history, and how you will occupy the space, because I think one of the things that I think has been a point of concern for some of us who were there for that time is that when we're sometimes given space in galleries and institutions that have had troubled history with us, is that the space we're given is not really about interrupting. It's about trying to ameliorate some history, but not really disrupting and not changing. And if also you envision using any of the ROM's own collection in part of that interruption.
So what we want to do this is why we're trying. First, we want to invite people that were part of the protests that happened when the Into the Heart of Africa was on, to come and reflect with us during the symposium. We need to change the mentality first before we can do anything with the actual artworks. And one little intervention that will happen also in the fall, it's we will invite a contemporary artist to do an installation, a sample video installation in the Africa Gallery. So that's one thing that we're doing. And of Africa is a multi-year program. It's not going to happen only this year. We're planning to do a 3-year activities that will end with an exhibition, a real, we will occupy a real space in the museum. And we're planning a publication as well. And also what we're doing also, we are in dialogue with the community. So it's not only us coming with ideas and stuff. We want to speak with the community and conduct workshop, inviting artists to work with the collection. That's one ideas we have, to have artists, contemporary artists, in dialogue with the material, proposing new ways of seeing, of interpreting the artifacts and the collection. So.
And another interruption, I think, that we are, and it's a small one, and these are all kind of incremental, is a small map exhibition that Sylvia Forney and I and Dominique are working on, where, because maps are really interesting objects, especially when you're looking at colonial maps and colonial maps of Africa. So what we're doing now is mining the archives and looking for maps that trace the pre-colonial conquest and up to 1884, 1885, and onward, and looking at how Africa changes, the kind of cartographic changes that happen as colonial incursion begins. And it's quite fascinating as we are going through it to see the kind of stamping of Africa with Belgium and England and Spain and Portugal, et cetera. So, those kinds of changes. And I think that'll be a really fascinating exhibition alongside the artifacts to show this kind of evolution of colonialism, but we're not kind of keeping it in that. The other interruption within the African Gallery is to, I think we don't have permission yet, but we are, I'm going to say it anyway, but we are looking at a contemporary African artist. He is from Mozambique, and he's created this little animation called
it's called My African Mind.
My African Mind. Yeah. And it is this animated piece about colonialism and the African body and what happens in about 15 minutes. Yeah. But it's a very, very powerful piece. So to put that, to insert that, to interrupt the African Gallery with something like this, next to the African objects, next to the maps that tell this story about colonialism, I think is a very kind of powerful interruption in itself. So I think that and that word interruption is very interesting. I think that's the way we approach this, always was with this idea that we were, in essence, coming into the space, reclaiming it in collaboration with the ROM, but also with our advisory committee. And again, I say it again, most importantly, people like Oji Odisa and Geraldine Mariba, Afua Cooper, people who were in the trenches during the struggle. So I hope that answers your question.
Last question. Okay, hi. I just actually had a question, and it was kind of in regards, I see 3 different projects happening in various kind of parts of the country. So I'm interested in the kind of how museum spaces or not just museum spaces, but art spaces in general, become sites of privilege, and how these spaces relate to power structures, and how things are exhibited. What I wanted to kind of ask in regards to this, though, was first I'll reference the book by Deborah Root, Cannibal Culture, she wrote in the early 90s, where she talks about how often marginalized communities or groups, their signs or their symbols, their art for that matter, how it's commodified, and then within the museum's space, how they get to choose what becomes historicized, how it does, or what gets left out. So I'm just really interested in maybe some of the challenges perhaps you face. I was just brought up. I thought of this because of what you were talking about, Pamela, of them selecting what kind of art or what images could be used. So maybe if you could describe that in some.
Yeah, well, it was interesting over the last day and a half of hearing about hearing the word intervention and interruption and, being put into a position as being positioned in that way. And I kind of struggle with that about going in as an interventionist, whereas, and I think that's why I'm interested in the idea of the Black Atlantic, where, we've always been in modernity. It's just that we haven't been theorized into that story, right? So I was interested, and that's what I wanted to go to the UK, and it was a particular show called Afro Modern at the Tate, Liverpool, which brought together like 60 artists, non-Canadian, that we're looking at how African culture had influenced modernity, like, the obvious example of Picasso, but, Rauschenberg, like Black culture has always been part of modernity. And, it's just a matter of remapping, of rethinking about the story. But, I question always being in opposition within the space and just being and just, not positioning myself that way. And the strategies I'm interested in artists' practice is, I think, taking off from like Henry Louis Gates, this idea of signifying, right, where you're like, it happens in hip hop too, where you're taking the dominant culture, but you're riffing off on it. You're finding some way to not necessarily appropriate it, but just make it your own, like blacken it. You know what I mean? And it's just like, I think if we just come in as ourselves and say, okay, you know what? Because with with the exhibition 28 Days, which was about Black History Month, we struggle with putting the subtitle, right? It's like, do we just call it 28 Days? Can we just call it that? But the gallery wanted to set the context. And, looking back on it, I don't think I would have put it in. You know what I mean? It's just, and I think about that with the work I do now. It's just, okay, I'm not necessarily saying that this is all Black artists, but it just is, right? And I think it's just a different kind of reverse invisibility, maybe, or something like that. Does that answer your question? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Michelle, did you have some thoughts?
I just wanted to add something quickly to that, which is that the reason Pam constantly finds herself in these in the role of interventionist is because most of the people who work in museums haven't read Deborah Root's book and can't explain the colonial history and structure of museums the way you just did. So there's the problem.
Thank you very much. Thanks the panel. Thank you, everyone.